S. Pruitt has a hand raised. Is there a question already, or did you want to have your, okay, now their hands down? Sharon, you have a hand raised? Do you have a question? Sharon Worth on our team?
No, I was just hovering over there. I saw a hand raised and I
Oh,
was just
okay.
trying to see who it was. No
Okay.
question.
Okay. Looks like we have about 49 people in here, and seems like everyone's in. So it's 10:11, fashionably late in city government webinar fashion, and so I think we can hand it off to Rashonda for introductions and go ahead and get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we present here at CDA, our non-housing CDBG RFP workshop. We are going to have some fun today where we talk about tips and common mistakes and important information. Over 3 slides, which we have today, are CDBG RFP best practices, designing a CDBG program, and then CDBG financial management. Our leadership team is here to support as we work through these slides, and we're going to jump right on in with our first slide, which is CDBG best practices. But before, we're going to remind you again that the Community Development Administration is a clearinghouse of all federal and state local funds for the city of St. Louis. And I've heard recently us referred to as the city's grant-making department. So this is our history, our evolution, and when HUD intervened. But in short, we're here to empower, develop, and help transform St. Louis with public services and affordable housing development. On our agenda today for our best practices proposal, we are going to go through the timeline. We're going to review our RFP sections. We are going to talk about mistakes and have Q&A. This is the timeline that you've seen posted. It's highlighted because today is August the 15th, and we're doing our public hearing, but specifically the training. I made sure on this slide to put ideal funding cycle timeline because generally our contract period starts on the 1st and goes through the 31st, but we have times where operating agencies need to extend a contract. And then CDA, sometimes we have other things that come up where contract execution doesn't take place during this ideal funding cycle timeline, but we're going to go through it. January the 1st of 2025, the CDBG activity will commence, and that is the date that you will put and we will have on your contract. By March 15th of 2025, we want to be receiving your programmatic and financial reports, contractually due on the 15th of each month. The first quarter 2025, we like to have some TA visits with you on the programmatic and fiscal monitoring side. And by the end of July, send you letters about your expenditure status. In third or fourth quarters, we may do programmatic monitoring site visits. And then by the end of the year of 2025, your program concludes. That's an ideal funding cycle timeline. By February 26th, year-end reports are due, and then we're requesting your final reimbursement. In general, HUD funds are to meet national objectives to support LMI population, to eliminate slum and blight, but also to respond to urgent need. So in the RFP, we ask you to review it very carefully to make sure that your program actually meets the national objectives, because there's no way we can get around what they require. And one of the most important sections is to see if your activity is eligible. And we have it all listed out. So just go through and look. And if it's eligible, apply. If it's not, don't. Follow the instructions, and upon completion of the proposal packet, there's a checklist. Review it carefully. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at CDBG, stlouis-mo.gov. The acknowledgement and certification portion of the RFP is very important because that's the fine print that no one generally likes to read, but it's really important that you acknowledge and certify that you read it and then in fact agree to what is there. And it must be signed by an authorized signer of your organization. That's usually the executive director or your board president or someone else is designated. Speaking of people within your organization, you want to make sure with setting up your profile that you first, if you don't already have a sam.gov UEI number, that you take the time today and apply. Our next slide will show you what that looks like. But you want to verify if you do have your sam.gov registration that it is still active and it's not close to expiring, and start to resolve those issues now. This is what the website looks like. You go to sam.gov, you'll see this page, you follow directions and go from there. Within the RFP, you'll see the organizational narratives and organizational background. This section is all about showing the capacity to deliver and administer the program that you're presenting. So you want to make sure it's strong. You're basically saying, I have a team of people, we can do the work, and here is why. Be inclusive, so tell us about everyone, but be succinct. A common mistake is providing either not enough information or TMI, too much information. So just be persuasive, be succinct, and then just demonstrate your organization's capacity to do the work that you're saying that you want to do with these HUD funds. This is an example. A daycare center that provides educational to toddlers should not request money for an eligible activity of a reentry program. The daycare should request money for childcare. Okay. Also, we want to know the history. If you're new, we need a letter of recommendation from a previous funder. These narratives should include professional descriptions and resumes. Common mistake is not submitting both your job descriptions and the resumes when required. Also, not including all the staff people that will be involved in administering the program, the management of the program, or the operation of the program. So, for example, even though CDBG funds may not be used to pay the CFO, the position is still involved in managing the program. So you want to include that person. Also, this is a good one. Adding subcontractors to this section, they should not be in this section. They actually should be added in the contractual and professional services portion. Okay, another one is not following EEO requirements for TBHs, which stands for to be hired. We'll talk more in depth about equal employment opportunity requirements. And if you have any questions about like acronyms and things, we have a glossary that we may be able to share with you, and feel free to write your questions down at the end of this presentation. We'll be more than happy to help you. This year, we're still using eGrams as our grants management software. Those who are familiar, great, this tip you won't need, but if you're new to eGrams, information that you provide, it carries through. So you want to make sure that it's listed correctly, especially as it pertains to your employee and your personnel schedules that you speak to later in the application. There is another slide dedicated to financial management. So we're going to touch on this briefly and then expand on it later. A copy of your IRS Form 990 is required, so you will need to submit that. For fiscal years ending June 30th, your 990 deadline is November the 15th. And for fiscal years ending on the 31st, the 990 deadline is May 15th. Also, if your organization is not current, you need to attach a copy of your approved extension from the IRS. Common mistakes are not providing the extension or not entering the financial person on your staff, their description, and then their resume. You want to ensure that under the financial management section that your system and internal controls are represented well and provide assurance that your organization can deliver the goals that you're saying you can in the proposal. Some common mistakes here are not expanding on your board of directors oversight, because some people's boards are very strong and helpful in financial matters. So in general, wherever you're strong, really showcase that in your proposal. For audit requirements, the single federal audit limit is a threshold is $750,000. So audit reports must be filed with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse 9 months after your organization's fiscal year and end date. That's just for you because these are federal funds and we want to lift it up so that you're aware. A copy of your most recently completed single audit is also required for us during this process. Because we are distributing federal funds, compliance is a major component. So you do want to familiarize yourself with 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart F. This governs our uniform admin requirements. And a common mistake is just not providing enough detail to support the audit process. So just familiarize yourself with 2 CF 200 Part Subpart F. Still in audit requirements, you want to provide a description, a brief description of any findings that you may have had and then how it was resolved. Common mistakes are not providing enough detail that's sufficient to address any concerns. People do have findings, organizations do have findings. It's not the end of the world. We just need to know how you address the concern and what you did to remedy that action. Now let's go into your proposed budgets. If you have a finding there that was issued as a result of the audit, make sure to capitalize on your funding sources. And common mistake is not including the fiscal year beginning and end dates. This is a great example. If your organization XYZ would like to request funding for an after-school program at 3 locations, then you have to submit 3 separate proposals or submit 1 proposal with all of the inclusive sites. So we have operating agencies that serve youth across the city, and they list the sites in the application. So you want to make sure that you do that so we have a comprehensive understanding of your program. Here's another. If organization Carrot would like to request funding for our after-school program at 3 locations, then Carrot can submit 3 separate proposals or submit 1 proposal for all the sites. If organization Spinach would like to request funding for an after-school arts program and a daycare center, then Spinach must submit 2 separate proposals. And the reason why Spinach must submit 2 separate proposals is because One is for the daycare and one is for after school. And so they're two distinct HUD funding goals that we report on the back end. So childcare is a separate reporting than youth services. So that's why they will need to be separate. I don't know if you guys can see my hands, but I'm trying to do this and that. Maybe I'll hold it here instead of down here. Moving on. A common mistake is the contact is not the primary person for the proposed activity, and we are always trying to get in touch with you. So if you are on the youth side, give us your youth person, and if it's the childcare side, give us your childcare person. We need the contact for both. Your CDBG proposal amount should be realistic and reasonable. Pausing for realistic and reasonable. All right. The activity summary is a mission statement of 100 words or less. You want to include your name, the purpose, location, and the service area. It's really important about the population and the demographics. We ask this because we have to report on it. If funded, your activity name and summary will be the activity name and summary on your contract. So make sure if you want it to be called Rudy Tooty Fresh and Fruity for all of the world to see, it's going to be called that if that's what you name it. Okay, a common mistake is the name has a political or religious reference. So you don't want to do that. And not including all addresses or locations or not adequately summarizing the activity. So part one, you want to describe the work to be performed, who, what, when, and how. If funded, CDA will only reimburse activities for LMI, low, moderate individuals within the city of St. Louis. So you want to be sure to describe the service area in your proposal, include census tracts, zip codes, and neighborhoods. It all has to tie back to the national objective. We have allowable outputs that are people and households, and they should be directly related to their proposed activities, and it should be measurable. So we helped 50 households over the 25 fiscal year. Those reimbursements are tied to measurable outcomes. So they'll be tied to the families, those 50 families. You want to be realistic again in your goal setting and be able to justify any per unit cost, so per household cost. And then when determining if it's reasonable, we analyze the per unit cost. Here's an example. XYZ organization requests $200,000 for a summer program, and they propose to serve 25 children for 3 months. So that per cost for the program is $8 grand. The per unit cost per child per month is $2,667. Do you think that's reasonable? Nobody want to tell me, that's fine. But ask yourself, would you pay that much per child per month? All right, moving right along. Site control tips. This is for public improvement and facilities. I want to go back here because I was laughing. And then also it's time to toss it over to our housing division side because we're going to be talking about public improvements and facilities activities. Stephanie Christian leads our housing division, and I will be touching on these slides briefly, and I will follow back up afterwards. Stephanie, just say next slide when you're ready, and I'll keep it moving.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about the public facilities and improvements projects. And we'll go through just the list that's on the slides here. So site control tips. Control has to be documented in the name of the entity that is applying. If the site is city-owned, the organization should have buy-in from the municipal holding entity prior to applying for funding. So meaning you should have an option on that property. It is possible to propose a project for a leased property. If you're the entity that is going to be doing the renovations and then therefore providing services after completion, but you're renting the property, that is allowable. However, the property owner must provide a statement of allowance to rehab. And they're also going to be a party to the deed of trust and the land use restriction agreement. So the owner of the property will have to participate in the legal documents. Project schedule, oh wait, not yet. Project schedule tips. The project's currently under construction or planning to begin construction earlier than June of 2025 are not eligible for this round of CDBG funding. Construction budget tips: professionally prepare a construction budget. Do not take your project out to bid. If funded, whoever prepares the construction budget cannot complete the sealed bid process. So you will want to have a contractor assist you with the completion of your application and the CDA pro forma, which is your financial projections for the project. If you include a GC, a general contractor, as part of your team in your application, that can be considered allowable and satisfy procurement. If you do not have a GC identified at the time of your application, you will need to adhere to the procurement regulations to select that contractor. If funded, solicitate, actually, did I just say that? I think I just said that. Next slide, thank you. Environmental review tips. If available, share any environmental reports, particularly any that include sampling specimen. CDA is still required to conduct their own environmental review according to HUD compliance. However, any information that you can provide can assist in that process and potentially speed up the process. If funded, any construction work or closing on a site acquisition without completion of an environmental review by CDA will automatically result in the rescinding of CDBG funding. This is very important. This is a HUD choice limiting action. This is beyond CDA's discretion. So from the time that you submit your application until the time that you are awarded and CDA completes the environmental review, no physical alterations can take place on the property. No transfer of ownership can take place, and no financial obligation can be executed on the property, including non-federal funds. Next slide, please.
That's it, Stephanie. Thank
Oh,
you so much for that. We'll be back around to you again. No worries. Let's talk about other funding. You should always have some other partners. We do not receive the same amount of funding from HUD each year, and sometimes are not able to fund the same agencies each year the same amount. So you want to be able to leverage your CDBG funding, and you want to show that to us in your budget narrative, your realistic budget narrative, and how the requested CDBG funds will be leveraged with your other funding opportunities. Additional tips are on the activity budget. should be greater or equal to the proposed CDBG amount. And then your expenses should not be more than your revenue, your anticipated revenue. Also, this is another procurement mention here that it is required at $10,000 or more per vendor. And then your personnel and salaries, timesheets, conflict of interest forms, secondary employment funds, and equal opportunity approval of new hires are required for personnel to be paid in whole and even in part by CDBG funds. We just said this, but we'll say it one more time really quickly. Not leveraging funds to show in your activity budget, not providing a description of each of your line items, and including contractual workers under personnel costs instead of in professional services. Thanks for this really cool graphic, Tom. Oops. For your personnel schedule, here's some tips. You want to have your actual salary per pay period should be the actual salary per pay period. And then the number of pay periods should be the number of pay periods in the entire year. You want to ensure a percent that's inserted in your organization narratives is correct. It's one of those errors that we might miss, but you want to make sure to double check. Well, I'm saying because not including the total pay periods like 26 or 24 or 12. Those are common mistakes. And then inserting the total amount paid each pay period. This is an example of a personnel schedule. So Jimmy Green is the program director. 25% of his salary is being charged to the block grant. And here's the total. Where Kathy Wright, she's an instructor, 50%. And then Lisa May. These are more examples. Here's another tip. If necessary, adjust the percentage of the benefits charged to the balance to the personnel schedule. I want you all to know that this is a quick overview, and we have team members that will work with you if you are new to the process and how to do all of this. You want to enter their hourly rate, enter the total hours for the entire year, and then ensure that that percentage is in the organization narrative section, but make sure it's correct. Another mistake is not including the total hours for the entire year. Only include employees on the personnel schedule. Contractors should not be in the personnel schedule again. They should be on the professional services line in your activity budget. And then all services exceeding $10,000 will require procurement. So how are we reimbursed? How are we reimbursed as organizations? You're reimbursed on units of service. The majority of non-construction contracts are on a per unit cost basis, are a fixed price for the unit of service completed. Your outputs will provide the basis for your unit of service. You should have no more than one unit of service per outcome or objectives. So you want to make sure that your units of services are really clear and defined, and include any assumptions or calculations. So here are some examples. Meals delivered to seniors, completed workshops for first-time home buyers, daily attendance in the after-school program, community gardens planted. I'm going to leave this up here just in case you want to copy it really quick. And I think it's recorded, so you can just refer to it later and we'll keep it moving. So let's do that. These are factors to be considered: the lifespan of your contract, the frequency of your reimbursements, the amount of your award or your request, reasonable assumptions, and your eligible program expenses. The units of service must be related to outputs, and they don't have to be the same. So for example, an after-school program could have people, and then they also could have daily attendance. So they could be an output for persons and use daily attendance on per unit cost. This is a beautification example. So we have a beautification program in a low mod area neighborhood, and the request is 25,000. We're assuming that it will be 2 beautification projects. So that is going to equate to 10 units. Her rate is 25,000, so we're going to divide that by 10. That's $2,500. So that's your per unit rate, $2,500 for this beautification program in a low mod area. Here's another example: Senior Meals on Wheels. So you requested $75,000, and you said we're going to help 100 seniors, and we're going to serve them 2 meals a day, which is a unit of service. Oh yeah. Unduplicated number of beneficiaries. So that means I couldn't come through the line twice. So it's just that one senior. It's just that one senior. Okay. Meals provided are 7 days a week for 50 weeks. So what we do is we take the total number of units, that's the 100 seniors times the 2 meals times the 7 days a week times the 50 weeks, and that's $70,000. We divide that through because with your request, and then we get your per unit rate of $1.07. And she's happy. She's very happy there. Hello, lady. In our third example, we have an after-school program for a low-income youth for $100,000. So we're estimating that we'll help 150 youth for the year. The program has the capacity for 120 youth at a time. So that's the daily attendance, is our unit of service. Our average daily attendance is 80%. Keep in mind, in school, 100% attendance is very rare. So you want to make a reasonable average. So this is reasonable of 80%. 180 school days are in a year. So we take the total number of units, the 96 over 120, that's the 80%, just so you guys see that again at the top. So it's 96 times 180 gives 17,280. We divide that by our request, and that's our per unit rate of $5.79. We have more examples. This is for job training, the same process to get out our per unit rate. Common mistakes are just not following instructions, all the way down to not updating a prior year proposal. If you are a repeat CDBG award recipient, great. Just update your year and your eGrams proposal. Speaking of eGrams, trying to work around the system, it's just not possible. The system is set up where if you do not have the correct prompt, you will not be allowed to move forward. And so we receive a lot of emails that eGrams is not working, but it's just, it just works so well that you're not able to work around it. So you have to put every single requested item into eGrams to move forward. What's another one to pull out of here? That's pretty good. If you have issues with eGrams, we have a couple of tutorials. They are still very relevant. So you can find them on CDA's website if you just search eGrams, and you'll get some walkthrough videos. I believe they're from 2020 15 and 16 and 17, and it hasn't changed. So for our RFP, you want to make sure that you're a nonprofit for the CDBG side of the non-housing RFP, that you have an EIN number, that you've registered with sam.gov, you want to have insurance, you want to review the key policies and procedures for conflict of interest, non-discrimination, grievance, affirmative action. And then for our construction requirements, pro forma probably should have been the first bullet listed here, but you also want to have site control. Well, it says construction budget, but it should also say pro forma, and these other requirements, including Davis-Bacon and Section 3 and MBE and WBE federal requirements. You must be in good standing with the state of Missouri, because we do a check at the Secretary of State's office. You must be a public or private nonprofit, again, and we will need you to upload that good standing certification, your IRS 501c3 determination letter, and then the current IRS 990 or your extension. If funded, you will need to submit this before entering into a contract with us, your state tax exempt letter, your sealed certificate of incorporation, along with your articles of incorporation, a copy of your board of directors bylaws, and a current completed board list of your directors with their titles, their mailing address, and business and racial ethnicity information. Organizations must have the capacity to undertake the proposed activities. We talked about that at length. This is a repeat. And a lot of this now is we're going to reiterate, so I won't go through it heavily, but this is just making sure that we have the organizational capacity. This is a call out. Funds may not be used to fund any inherently religious activity. Talked about sam.gov. If you have a DUNS number and you haven't replaced it, they no longer exist. It's called a UEI now. You need to get a new one. E-Verify. Okay, if funded, you will be required to comply with this section's 285.500 and provide proof of E-Verify registration. This is regarding U.S. citizenship and immigration policy. You have to pass CBI clearance with the city of St. Louis. You need to have insurance. It needs to be at least $1 million for general liability, vehicle liability of $500,000 per occurrence, and workers' compensation, honesty bonding. And then the city of St. Louis, we must be listed as an additional insurer on your policy. If funded, CDA will require insurance and bonding information to the term of the contract to protect from loss or due to theft, fraud, or undue physical damage related to the program. And these are the limits for commercial blanket bond. An honesty bond is $25,000 per occurrence. All persons employed and are authorized to perform functions related to the CDBG program must be included, along with the executive director, board members, and signatory and financial officers and staff. You need to show us written policies and procedures. So you will need to provide those or any manual that you have. And it's important to have written procedures beyond just personnel matters. So this is an example about what is your file retention policy? How long are you keeping them? How do you track program data, like attendance and job placements or counseling? And then how do you verify that people are eligible in your program that you are asking federal funds to support? If funded, there are several policies that must be submitted before you can enter into a contract. We've talked about this in its grievance, conflict of interest, non-discrimination, and affirmative action. They must be written down. Your grievance policy must pertain to your employees and allow for resolution. It should include specific procedures, the time frame, and the people responsible for handling it. And it should address discrimination and complaints and incorporate specific items and deadlines. Please note that the city has additional protected classes, and the race, color, religion, national origin, age, disability, sex, familial status, and political affiliation. In the grievance policy, when an applicant, participant, or registrant feels deprived under CDBG programs, the agency must make a reasonable effort to identify the complaint within 15 days of the initial complaint. And if the agency cannot satisfactorily resolve the complaint within the time frame, it should forward the complaint to the CDA executive director within 2 working days for remedies made available to the agency using its grievance policy. For conflict of interest, the agency must request an exception in writing to CDA before a conflict of interest occurs, as if it is likely. Our attorney will then decide if the conflict of interest can have an exception and does not violate state law, and there will be a public disclosure of that conflict in a general circulated newspaper, and will be paid for by the person with the conflict. Examples are: the son of a board member was hired as a program coordinator for a CDBG funded after school program. Another example, a senior center has a board member who participates in the CDBG funded exercises at the center. Another example is an executive director of a CDBG funded food pantry also owns an accounting company, which has been awarded a contract to provide accounting services. These are real examples that all are conflict of interest. The policy must be written and possess a code of standards covering the conflict of interest. Board members, the executive director, and staff paid with CDBG funds involved with the management and administration and procurement will be required to sign the conflict of interest form. And CDBG funded staff will be required to sign both the conflict of interest form and the employee secondary questionnaire. Agencies awarded funding must comply with the intent of this policy, and they're required to develop a written procedure which incorporates CDA's non-discriminatory policy, and still are required to comply with all EEO laws and regulations contained within CDA's contract. For affirmative action, there must be a written plan to guide the organization according to the President's Order 11-246 as amended, and shall be not limited to a statement of policy on employment, promotion, demotion, transfer, recruitment, and recruitment advertising, layoffs, and selection for training. It can be included in the organization's personnel policies. These items are required for your application: your UEI number from SAM.gov, your 501c3 determination letter, your certificate of good standing, current IRS 990, resumes and job descriptions, organizational chart, letter of recommendation from a previous funder. That's if you are new. And these items are needed prior to the contract, which we've talked about at length. with our construction requirements. Our team member Stephanie will be jumping on again to go through definitions and these next few slides.
Thank you. Hello again. So back to public facilities and improvements projects. Some of the requirements definitions include the publicly owned facilities. So this could be a city-owned property, but in most cases for you all, it's going to be owned by a not-for-profit agency. Infrastructure projects such as streets, playgrounds, and underground utilities. Buildings owned by nonprofits that are open to the general public. Acquisition, construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, or installation of public facilities and improvements are what is allowable activity under the public facilities and improvements category. Maintenance activities are not eligible. Your public facilities and improvements project must meet a national objective that was spoken about a little bit earlier in the presentation. For these projects, it is typically a low to moderate income individual national objective as an area benefit activity. So that means the completion of your facility and the services provided in the completed facility will benefit an area of 51% or more low to moderate income by HUD definition. Next slide, please. Required at the time of application. Proof of control over the property. Again, this is just a reiteration of what was mentioned earlier on. So you could present a deed or a lease with allowance to rehab or a land redevelopment area option. Again, if you're leasing the property, the owner must be aware that they will be a party to the legal documents. There will be a deed of trust on the property and a land use restriction agreement. In short, what that means is there will be legal documentation in place to ensure that this property is used for the intended purpose as indicated in your application and award for the HUD regulated required time period, which is generally for 5 years or more, depending. A clear title upon construction. If the site is city-owned, description of interaction the applicant has had with LRA or the Board of Public Services or Department of Parks and Recreation or other holding entities. And it must be in the name of the applicant. Or again, with permission from the property owner if leasing. A timetable that outlines the start and end dates and milestones must be met for the project to be completed on time. There are CDBG timeliness requirements for construction projects. The construction must begin within 9 months of your executed contract date. And construction must be fully completed within 24 months of your executed contract date. Next slide, please. Okay, so design documents, photos, and construction budgets. Design drawings indicate your proposed scope of work for the project. These can be preliminary schematic drawings with elevations and floor plans. We will conduct a Section 106 historic preservation review. Even if the building is not designated as historic or it's not in a National Historic District or eligible National Historic District, it still has to go through this process and be documented as such. So this is a review that will be conducted by the city, both through CDA staff as well as cultural resources staff. Photos of the existing building or area of construction. The next couple points sort of all tie in together. So there are very specific angles that must be captured in the photography to be submitted for the 106 review. You may present these yourself. Also, CDA staff will be conducting an initial site visit and inspection of the property. So if you do need assistance, we can also assist you at that time after your award. But if you can provide pictures ahead of time, that is more beneficial to your application and will help us better assess and review your overall project. A professionally prepared construction budget, not just a bid. Okay, so this information should be presented using the CDA Pro Forma workbook. And it has been provided as an attachment upload, is that correct? Okay, very good. So it's an Excel workbook with multiple tabs. Please complete the entire workbook. And we certainly understand that a lot of this information can sound very, very foreign to folks who are applying for these projects, being that in most cases, they are non-for-profit agencies who specialize in providing public services to our community, yet they need a new facility or an improved facility in which to conduct those services. And they're not necessarily well-versed in construction budgets and processes. So as we mentioned before, it'd be highly, strongly recommended that you work closely with a contractor when putting together your proposal and these construction budgets on the pro forma. The pro forma budgets are based on AIA schedules of values. So they're very commonly used in the construction field. So, pretty much any contractor you work with should be familiar with those cost line items and what that looks like. We also would like to see a construction resume prior project experience with your agency. If you have done other facilities before, please provide that information. That's always good to see, including the scope of work, date, address, your team, your architect, general contractor, your construction costs and square footage, all that kind of meat and potatoes information will be helpful. Next slide, please. Construction requirements for procurement. So selection of your general contractor can occur after completion of the environmental review, unless your contractor is part of your proposal from the start. If they're included as part of your application, then as part of your team, then that's allowable. But if not, then it takes place after completion of the environmental review. We want to obtain preliminary approval for the request for proposals for your publication. So this allows us to ensure that all of the proper language regarding the requirements tied to this funding are included, to be sure that any respondents to your request for proposal or bid solicitation are fully aware of what will be required by them to accept an offer on this job. And some of those provisions include Section 3, Davis-Bacon, MBE, WBE clauses, and also I missed adding it to this particular slide, is the Buy America, Build America Act. We'll talk a little bit about each of those coming up here in just a moment. Formal advertising and sealed bids are required in a 30-day bid period. And we must post in the required locations, including a general circulation paper, a minority paper, and with the Crossroads Plan Room. The requirement is that the selection is based on the lowest responsive bidder. And responsive can be considered someone who obviously provides a bid in response to the RFP, but also somebody who is accepting of the requirements for the Section 3 Davis-Bacon, MWBE, and Build America, Buy America requirements. You may have two bids that are close, but one of them, says, I'm not doing that, or, whatever, and the other one has experience with it and they agree to it and all that. So that second person would be considered more responsive than the first. Next slide, please. Your MBE, WBE requirements. So these are going to be monitored by SLDC. So each funding round, CDA will notify SLDC of the projects that require this monitoring, and they'll reach out to you and they will do a one-on-one technical assistance visit and introduction, and they'll go through in detail with you how to report, what needs to be reported, and introduce you to the Global Project Tracking System, or GPTS. That is the system that they use to receive all of the reporting and do all the monitoring through that system. So the trigger is if the contract with the city or one of their agents, such as CDA, is 1 million or more. And that will trigger the diversity inclusion and the MWBE requirements. Next slide, please. Davis-Bacon. So requirements for Davis-Bacon are going to be triggered for non-housing construction projects, which would be these public facilities, when they are awarded $2,000 or more in federal funding. So that's pretty much everybody. This hasn't been updated in quite some time. So this is what we have to go with. So those Davis-Bacon requirements require submission of certified payroll reports weekly by each contractor. That's the GC and each subcontractor on the project. They will be required to adhere to the Department of Labor's prevailing wage determination that is valid at that particular time of your contract. Those get modified regularly throughout the year. So whichever modification is valid at the time of your contract date will be the prevailing wage requirements for the duration of the project. Okay. CDA will also conduct site visits to interview a minimum of 2 workers from each subcontractor on site. This is a very short interview. It won't take much of their time. We just validate that they are earning the appropriate wages, that they're being treated fairly, that there's no discrimination, that type of thing. If applicable, a signed memorandum of agreement indicating who will monitor Davis-Bacon requirements must be issued prior to CDA preliminary approval of the RFP. So an MOA may be required under the following circumstances: if other federal funds are utilized, or if the site is city-owned by the Board of Public Services. Next slide, please. Section 3 overview. So again, I just want to reiterate that this presentation is just intended to be a general overview of these items. Once awarded, each operating agency will receive a pre-construction meeting and further technical assistance on each of these requirements. So don't panic if you feel like this is a lot of information and you're not sure how to do all of these things. It's okay. We will help you along the way through your award. We just want to make sure that everyone is aware upfront of which requirements their project may trigger, and to be aware to expect those conversations in the future as far as how to provide the compliance for each of these. So Section 3 will be triggered by any project that is awarded $200,000 or more in CDBG funding. And the benchmark requirements for this are based on total labor hours. The 25% of the total labor hours to be performed by Section 3 workers and 5% by targeted Section 3 workers. These are specific definitions that in short pertain to folks who are income eligible by HUD definitions. If they meet the certain low to moderate income guidelines, they can be classified as a Section 3 worker. Or if they are employed by a Section 3 business, which I'll talk about next. And there's a couple of other specific qualifications to identify who those workers and targeted workers are. Again, we'll get into that during your technical assistance visit post-award. A Section 3 business, if your business or the subcontractors, I should say, qualify as a Section 3 business, again, by way of a couple of qualifying criteria, one of them being the income of the business owners, then automatically all of those workers can be counted as Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers. So it's really encouraged to get as many businesses as possible to send in their certification form, because it makes meeting those benchmarks and the reporting so much easier. Next slide, please. Okay. Where'd we go? I think we missed a couple. Was this continued? Okay, so this is, no, next one. There we go. All righty, so after the funding awards are announced, your CDA program monitor will issue notification to the CDA Section 3 coordinators. They'll be working with you directly throughout your project. Again, we'll provide more of the detailed requirements at that time for you, so don't fret if this is not all sinking in right now, it's okay. And any final revisions or additional requests for documentation will we'll work with you during that process to make sure everything is completed. Some reminders that qualified subcontractors who are eligible Section 3 business concerns are intended to get priority under the HUD rule. So basically the Section 3 requirements say that projects that are federally funded will make efforts to the greatest extent feasible to ensure that this project provides economic opportunity to low and moderate income persons. So with that said, if you have two contractors who have submitted bids for the project and one has previously been recognized as an eligible Section 3 business and the other has not, and or they're unwilling to do that, provided that their bids are similar in cost, the intent is that the Section 3 business concern eligible respondent would get the priority bid. Start working with us early on after your award has been reserved, so that we can help ensure the process goes as smoothly as possible. And above all, construction will not be permitted to start until Section 3 is approved. So respond to any request from CDA quickly, because timeliness of this process is greatly dependent on responsiveness. And as I mentioned, there is a HUD regulatory timeliness requirement that we start construction within 9 months of your contract. Next slide, please. All right, and Build America, Buy America overview. So this is a relatively new regulation or act that was signed into law in November of 2021. So projects receiving financial assistance are under this rule intended to utilize materials that are manufactured in the United States. So this will be triggered for projects whose total development cost is $250,000 or more, and they're receiving CDBG funding. Some of the requirements on your end will include manufacturer certifications of those materials. There are waivers available for this requirement. There are general waivers for exigent circumstances. They're also for the de minimis. So if your project is less than the 250,000, or you are a tribal recipient of the funding. Those are general waivers that are automatically in place, and no HUD review or approval is required beyond that. There are also project-specific waivers that are subject to HUD review and approval. So this would be things like if applying the Build America, Buy America requirements would be inconsistent with public interest, or if the materials are not produced in sufficient and reasonable available quantities or quality in the United States, or if the inclusion of the iron steel manufactured products or construction materials produced in the United States would increase the cost of the project by more than 25%. Again, don't worry if you're not hanging on to all this information. We'll walk you through it upon the receipt of your award. But just to let you know, there are waivers for that piece of things as well. Next slide. Okay, construction requirements in your application. Your project experience, we talked about this before. Your project name, scope of work, date, address, architect, general contractor, your construction costs and square footage. A lot of that information is going to be asked of you in the CDA pro forma workbook. So if you just go through and fill that all out, you'll knock out a lot of those requirements. Your site control, again, copy of your deed, copy of a LRA option, or your lease agreement, which includes a statement of allowance to rehab from the owner. Your project schedule, professional construction budget, which again is the pro forma. This is, once again, this is not your bid. This is a line item of costs based on AIA schedule of values. Design documents. This says optional. It is optional, but if you do have drawings, please provide them, even if they're conceptual drawings. Photos using the 106 photo guidelines, which is included in the attachments. Is that right? Tom or Rashonda, is that diagram included for them?
The
106
online diagram?
The 106 photo guidelines.
It's available on the website. If I know we're just being really general here, but if they want more information, they can reach out to us, and we'll send them the link to where that PDF is on the CDA's web pages.
Perfect, thank you. Any interactions with city holdings entities, if applicable, your experience managing sealed bids, Section 3 or Davis-Bacon, if applicable, if you've ever done anything like that before. When you're looking for your contractor, if it's, just someone that you are going to consult with to prepare your application, and later on when you are doing your RFP to solicit your general contractor. If you have somebody has experience working on federally funded projects, even better if they have experience with CDBG projects. That can definitely be an asset to you and a leg up. Provide any descriptions of Section 106 or environmental assessments if they have been previously conducted. Once again, we still have to provide our own documentation to HUD through our award, but providing that documentation of anything previously performed on the property will be helpful to move that process along and inform that process. And then finally, the CDA pro forma workbook. I really want to stress how critical it is to include this attachment in your application for these projects. The financial projections on this document are going to provide a lot of information to the review team as far as the viability of the project and the timeliness and how it will be executed. So please provide each asked for piece of information in that pro forma. Let's see, so the following additional items needed for construction prior to entering into a contract would include the solidified buy-in from any city holdings entities if applicable. Your design documents. The design documents at this stage, so we're talking about after you've received your funding reservation and we're moving on to going forward with your project. Design drawings are the first thing that we need to get from you to initiate that environmental review and the historic preservation review process. So at that point, that is when we will need the schematic drawings of the floor plans and elevations. And no acquisition or construction has taken place at this time. Remember, from the time that you submit your application, none of that can take place until the environmental review is fully completed, including the procurement of your contractors. Next slide.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Is that it? Okay.
So that concludes our CDBG best practices. Our next two presentations are going to be hyper specific. In particular, we're going to talk to new CDBG applicants about what is LMI, what is HUD, how do we really apply according to the national objectives. So wanted to preface that. And then our last presentation will be over financial management led by our other team members. Are we going to continue moving forward and save Q&A for the end? All right, so let's do it. We're jumping right into our next presentation. So the goals of this workshop are to review the necessary requirements to operate a CDBG funded program, to determine if your organization meets the general requirements to apply for the CDBG funding, and then cover financial, well, no, we'll be doing that in a later workshop. All right. We're going to go over the CDBG background, national objectives, and eligible activity. So CDBG was enacted by the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. It's one of the longest HUD programs, and it provides municipalities and other units of government around the country the resources to create viable urban communities. The goals are to provide decent, affordable housing, provide a suitable living environment, and expand economic opportunities, primarily for low and moderate income persons. The steps for designing CDBG eligible programs are to identify, determine. So you want to identify a concept or an idea. You want to determine whether it's going to meet a national objective, and then if it's a CDBG eligible activity, and if it's reasonable based on how much it will cost to run the program. The national objectives are prevention of or elimination of slum and blight, activities to address an urgent threat to health or welfare, and benefits to low and moderate income people. For the purposes of the CDBG RFP that we have released for fiscal year 2025, urgent need is not an criteria for this RFP. Elimination of slum and blight is not common, but it comes across three subcategories: slum blight area basis, slum blight spot basis, and then slum blight renewal area. A slum blight area basis is to eliminate slums and blight in a designated area. It's most common of all the national objectives related to slum and blight, and it's through ordinance. And you must document that at least 25% of that service area has visible signs of deterioration or public improvements are in a state of deterioration. The slum blight spot basis is to eliminate specific conditions of blight or physical decay on a spot basis that's not located in a slum or blighted area. And then the slum blight urban renewal area is to eliminate slum or blight as part of a plan, a big urban renewal plan. But that's not applicable under this, so we're moving right on forward. Urgent need is also not applicable, but it is to address emergency situations. However, we're big on these activities benefiting low to moderate income persons. The statute requires that at least 70% of all CDBG expenditures benefit this population. Cumulative actual expenditures, not budgeted. Your records must also document low, moderate income persons and the status of each and every participant. These are the CDBG income limits to define this population. A person's income must have equal to or less than the limit established by HUD to the size of the person's family or household. A single person is considered one. So we see here, low end would be 30% at 21,700, to moderate would be 57,800 for one person. This chart is also found on the city's website and on the HUD exchange, and this is effective this year as of May 2024. Activities benefiting LMI persons, family versus household. A family definition is the income must be the total of all adult family members, not exceeding 80% of the current AMI based on family size. A family is defined as all persons living in the same household who are related by blood, marriage, or adoption. Unrelated persons are considered to be one-person family for this purpose. Adult children who continue to live in the home with their parents are considered to be a part of the family, and their income must be counted. A dependent child, however, are living outside of the home, like, at college or student housing, is considered to be a part of the family, even though they're living somewhere else. With CDBG, there is a difference between household and family. Public service program and almost all non-housing activities include the use of family. Examples are childcare centers, after-school programs, food pantries, and etc. Whereas housing programs typically use households for home repair programs, down payment assistance, So it's very important that your procedures and forms utilize the correct definitions. The household definition is income that total all adult household members not exceeding 80% of the AMI based on the household size. A household is defined as all persons occupying the same housing unit, regardless of their relationships to each other. Occupants can be a single family or two or more families living together, or a group of unrelated or related persons sharing arrangements. So examples are unrelated roommates. Both roommates apply for a home repair loan. Both are considered members of the same two-person household. So the same two roommates apply for a job training program, they would be considered separately for their family size. So for the purposes of the public services, each of them could apply, but for the purposes of a household, it will be just the one for that household. And example number 2, Jackie has 2 children and moves in with her friend Susie, who also has 2 children. Susie applies for home repair assistance. She would be considered a 6-person household. Susie enrolls one of her children in an after-school program. She will be considered a 3-person family. Example number 3, Billy has 3 children, one of which is away of college and lives in a dorm. Billy applies for down payment assistance. He will be considered a 3-person household. But on the public service side, in a job training program, he will be considered a 4-person family. I hope those examples helped you guys. Let's go into the low to moderate income person subcategories. So they consist of LMC, low moderate clientele, LMA, a low to moderate area, LMJ for low moderate jobs surrounding employment, and then low to moderate housing. Activities that serve a limited clientele are based on the nature and location, the presumed benefit, the family size, and income. CDA requires all LMC programs utilize intake forms. And that's how we determine eligibility. Based on nature and location, it's not as common. Like an example, a daycare center and a public housing development that only serves public housing residents. That must be approved by CDA. Presumed benefit is the most exclusively served and presumed group. So presumed classes are the elderly, severely disabled, migrant farm workers, persons with AIDS, homeless persons, abused children, battered spouses. An example of a presumed benefit for that population is Senior Meals on Wheels program. So it's identifying your program for a specific subset. Family size and income. This is a common national objective for public services activities. These are daycare centers, youth services, after-school programs for ages 6 to 18, summer programs for at-risk youth, job readiness training, food pantries, tax assistance. For this, you have to document that at least 51% of all participants are low to moderate city of St. Louis residents. Failure to document this will result in not being able to be paid with CDBG funding. We require all LMC, low to moderate income clientele, to utilize intake forms. That's how we determine eligibility. For LMA, low to moderate income area, boundaries must be clearly identified, and this is by census tracts, our neighborhood, or zip code. That area must have at least 51% of LMI people. Typically, we use census data to determine this. It also must be primarily residential, and it must benefit all the residents of the area, and it must define a reasonable service area. For LMJ, this is all activities related to economic activity, including like construction of a business incubator, designated to offer space and assistance to small business. In order to meet this criteria, you must create or retain permanent jobs. And 51 or more percent of the jobs created must be available for or held by LMI people. Jobs counted on a full-time basis. So that's what FTE is, and at least one full-time equivalent is a permanent job. And failure to satisfy job requirements will result in payback of CDBG funds. For LMH, this is the only low to moderate income objective for housing activities. And it must meet housing's national objective, and structures must be occupied by low to moderate households. Typical activities include homeowner unit rehab, rental acquisition and rehab, and then home buyer assistance. So this is a quick summary. We went through all of our national objectives, focusing really on LMI and the different subcategories so you can really understand with crafting your application where to pinpoint your program to maximize your chances. For your eligible programs, you want to identify the concept, determine the national objective, again, determine the eligible activity and the reasonableness of the program costs. Keep in mind that CDBG funds can only be used for categories that meet our basic eligibility. And we have these matrix code that exists in a HUD system called IDIS. And they are explicitly stated, like it's a code for childcare, a code for youth services, a code for persons living with HIV and AIDS. It's very specific, and we want you to be that specific in your application so we'll know how to qualify you. That's through adequate documentation. And for the activity to be considered eligible, it must be included in our most recent consolidated plan. To qualify for CDBG funding, it must meet a national objective and eligible activity. These include acquisition of real property, clearance and demolition, rehabilitation of housing, construction of public facilities, micro enterprises, public services, public improvement, economic development, homeownership assistance, planning, and capacity planning. And it's all in your RFP listed out explicitly. So you can always refer back to that. Ineligible activities are like city hall improvements, buildings for conduct of government, political activities, religious activities, explicitly stated religious activities, depending. Under this category, CDBG funds may be used to provide public services. And the public services are included, but not limited to recreation, public safety activities, childcare, job training, services for homeless persons. This is an example. So we have LMC. That's our national objective that we're meeting. And it will qualify if the public services is limited to a specific group of people where 51% or more are low to moderate income persons. And the services qualifying under this category serve a specific clientele. So serve seniors, serve youth, rather than providing services to all persons in a geographic area. The energy conservation training specifically for LMI persons, provision of meals to homeless seniors. We talked at length about public facilities and improvements, but they may be used for nonprofits for acquisition, construction, reconstruction, rehab, and installation of public improvements or facilities. These facilities must be open to the general public. Here's another example of public facilities and improvement. This is a rehab, including installation of an energy efficient window or door. And the center is located in Kingsway East neighborhood. And they're going to be paving gravel streets, installing some curbs and some gutters and sidewalks in the Tower Grove South neighborhood. So this will qualify if the public facility or improvement will be used for a purpose that benefits all residents in that area, and are at least 51% of those residents are LMI people. All right, let's do some quick games. Okay, true or false? Our program helps people in need. Don't look. Our program helps people in need and provides a good service to the community. Yet it still may not be an eligible program for for CDBG funding. True or false? Yeah, so the answer is true. Okay. It's a lot of great programs and we see it, right? You guys are doing a wonderful job. However, CDBG regulations establish specific eligibility criteria. So the program may not meet, even if it is good and provides a needed service. It must be eligible for this federal grant program. So it may not necessarily be right for CDBG. Pop quiz. My family meets the LMI and I am disabled. Weeds in my yard are too tall and I need to hire someone to cut them down, but I can't afford it. Can I call the city tomorrow and get some CDBG money to help me pay for the service? No, it's false. Unless there's a city-approved program that has already secured CDBG funding for the year for that purpose. Also, CDBG funding is specific to nonprofits or organizations and not to people directly, Pop quiz. Our agency and our program are eligible, but we don't have adequate resources and internal systems to ensure compliance with CDBG regulations. Therefore, our agency is not up to task of administering a CDBG funded program. That is true. You are not ready. If your agency does not have the capacity or capability to comply with CDBG regulations, you will not be considered for CDBG funds. So you want to determine your eligibility. You want to determine CDBG eligible activities and if you meet a national objective. It's important for an activity to qualify under CDBG. It must meet a goal, national objective, and eligible activity. Here's an example. Capitol Hill Community Service is proposing to have a neighborhood beautification for 6 distinct projects in the Jefferson and Lincoln neighborhoods. They're going to recruit volunteers who will clean up and landscape the vacant lots, and they're going to partner with local organizations to donate supplies and maintain completion. Is it an eligible activity? Absolutely. Yes, it is. Neighborhood beautification. And it does it meet a national objectives? Absolutely. Yes, it does. In a low to moderate income area. The city of Green Acres is expanding. This is another example. Okay, they're expanding their community center and their recplex. The new building will have a pool, expanded office space for city staff, and meeting rooms for council meetings. The city is primarily in a low to moderate income area, and data has shown that residents are at risk of diabetes, obesity, and other poor health outcomes. Is it eligible? Nope. It's not, because this is serving a government purpose and the national objective that it's meeting, it's not applicable. Example 3 is Senior Services is proposing their Meals on Wheels program, which will be delivered to elderly and disabled residents. With additional funding, Senior Services could serve an additional 100 clients. Is this eligible? Yes, it is. Absolutely, because it's a public service serving a low to moderate clientele and at presumed benefit, they're seniors. It's absolutely eligible. Great program. Example number 4, Head Start. They propose to expand their childhood program to 75 children from 50 children. And over 90% of the children come from families who receive food stamps or other public assistance. The facility is also located in the Low to Mod neighborhood. Is this eligible? Yes, it is. And what national objective? It's low moderate clientele. So we've gone through the next one, really drilling down and letting you know what you need to look for your program. If you are a new agency, go back to the recording, look in the RFP, and we can get through this. We'll provide a lot of technical assistance to help you if you are selected. For the last slide presentation, we're going to focus on financial management and best practices. Our fiscal team will be walking us through this, and it's very, very useful. It's also a part of our monitoring division on the fiscal side. So we're going to welcome you and run through our financial management systems. I don't know if Sharon will be leading our presentation or Brian, but
Right, I can take over this part for,
thanks, Brian. So I'm going to skip from the agenda and jump right into our financial management systems. Over to you.
okay. Thank you, thank you. Okay, a brief, just welcome to CDA. This is a fiscal section. We oversee the financial management. Will be the group that you will be requesting funds from, when you get your award. And monthly, you will submit a monthly financial report, and usually along with that, that's a good time to also request reimbursement, or if you're on a per unit basis, just draw down your funds from your grant award. And we're going to cover the main topics, which would be cash management and allowable costs, accounting records and the documentation that goes with that. The disbursement process, and then the financial reporting. Like I said, monthly, you must submit a monthly financial report and list your cost that you incurred that month. And if you're going to utilize the indirect cost method, then you must prepare a modified total direct cost, and I'll briefly touch on that. So, the first one is, the objectives. What we're here to help you, and the federal government wants strong management practices, and the key components, they all fit together to ensure that you can adequately manage your funds and also ensure compliance and eligibility with what you're doing, whatever your activity is. Financial management can be defined many ways, and I think the definition that we've put down here that applies to most of our recipients would be: it's just a process of protecting and using federal funds effectively, efficiently, and transparently. And it's achieved through the systemic application of procedures, forms, rules of conduct, and standards. And another word for that is internal controls, really. And it's important because federal laws and local laws require it, as it ensures accountability and helps make sure that the money is expended the way it was intended. So that's really what most of our procedures are all about, to have a system in place to ensure that you're doing what your contract enables you to do, and that you can adequately document the steps along the way. So, some of the core principles in a management system, you want to promote the integrity by protecting the funds from being wasted or misused. And that ensured that everything's adequately documented using systems that are easy for HUD and their federal grantees to understand. And that basically, you want an accounting system that follows GAAP. And there are some systems, some requirements that CDBG doesn't always follow GAAP, but for the most part, they do follow GAAP unless it's something excluded in the regulations that it lets you deviate from GAAP. But if your accounting system follows GAAP, you're on the right track. All spending is planned through the budgeting process. So, as you know, when you provide your application, submit your application, you will provide a budget as well. And then we check the actual expenditures against that budget. And that's really what your monthly financial report does. It lists your budget as you estimated in your application, and then you list the actual cost each month. And we're seeing how in line you are, and it's just a guide to ensure that you're on track to expend your money timely and also achieve your objectives at the same time. You know, all applicable regulations, including the cost principles that are in the uniform guidance, you'll be required to comply with. And again, that's why we set up the process the way we do with the monthly financial reporting. It's designed to test and ensure that you are complying with the regulations. You might think of it, it's just another monthly report, but the design behind it is our way of ensuring your compliance. And so we can go on to the next page. It's the financial management system. The key components we have are cost principles, budgeting, procurement, internal controls, accounting records, reporting, and audits. And I'll touch on each one of these very briefly. So the cost principles, that defines what is allowable, reasonable, and you can allocate it. Can you allocate the expense? There's 3 critical questions to ask about all costs. And that's like, if you're ever not sure if something's eligible to under the CDBG program, just ask these 3 basic questions. Is the cost allowed by our funding sources? Number 2 is it cost reasonable? Meaning, is the cost what a prudent person would pay in this situation? And the last one, can the cost be allocated to specific funding source based on what we know about the cost and what it's paying for? And I think it's just, the question is it reasonable and necessary to carry out this activity? If it's reasonable, yes. That means, you don't buy a Cadillac when you can use just a basic car. I mean, and that applies to all type of supplies. You don't buy the most elaborate stuff. You want to make sure you spend your money efficiently and in a manner that you can accomplish your goals by being practical with the money. Budgeting. Every activity must be guided by a budget. And the budget is an overall plan on how you intend to spend the money. It's a federal requirement, and it's an ongoing check for reasonableness by comparing over time how you're spending the money. Is it in line with what you estimated in your budget? And also it tells you how much money you have left, and that you can anticipate whether you have adequately budgeted for the year and for the activity, and if there's a need to go back and talk to CDA if you're running into a problem. But budgeting is a requirement by federal regulations. Procurement, or purchasing procurement, it not only promotes cost reasonableness, but it also ensures the goods and services were purchased in a way that is fair and transparent. Now, for CDA, for purchases of $10,000 or more, you are required to do procurement. And this means over time, so not just a single purchase. So, for example, if you're going to start off with certain limited supplies to start your activity, and then you purchase more as the year goes on as needed. But the $10,000 rule would apply cumulatively for each vendor. So just keep in mind, if you're going to exceed $10,000 per year per contract for any one vendor, that you need to do procurement with CDBG funds. And the first step on that would be to contact your program monitor to ask about the procurement process. Financial management systems, internal controls. Internal controls are designed to minimize the use of funds in poor record keeping and maximize the likelihood of detecting problems if they occur. They're a combination of tools designed to ensure that multiple people check any expenditure so that no one person can defraud the organization. Simply put, no one person has control over the funds. Like, that's why an example is a purchase order. If you need to purchase something, you may need to ask your superiors or your boss to approve that purchase, and that would be documented. And then within that process, you're going to get bids to determine whether the cost is reasonable, and you want to buy ideally from the lowest bid, as long as you're purchasing a quality product for that bid. And another example in internal controls, they're not always just about money. Internal controls can be like the application process to see if somebody's eligible, an intake form to test whether somebody meets the qualification. That's also a form of internal controls. So internal controls are very broad. It's a term that has broad implications. And like I say, it's not just about money. It can be about just compliance with program requirements and for eligibility. Accounting records. You know, fund accounting is the type of accounting that's used by HUD grantees. And it's a method of recording data based on the sources and use of the funds. And, you know, you've been given an award from CDBG, that's us. And then, you know, how you're going to use it. You have to track this on your accounting system where you have the ability to segregate CDBG costs and expenditures from all your other costs. Let's say your agency is a large agency and you have 2 or 3 programs. You have to be able to track the cost strictly for CDBG for one, and maybe on your monthly financial statements or annual financial reporting, all these costs roll up together, but you still have to have the ability to separate out expenditures focused with CDBG funds. And then, so, you know, that's one of the key things. You can do that by coding on your account codes. You can have in that sequence a certain account code relative to your specific award. And because your monthly reporting were only to CDA is strictly for the CDBG funding and not all of your other funding from your agency funding sources. So just keep in mind that that when your accounting system must be able to track your funds by funding award. If you're going to get more than one award from CDA for CDBG funds, you have to be able to track each program separately. And we just need to ensure that your accounting system has that capability. Reporting. Reporting is the mechanism that program staff and finance staff use to verify and document that the funds have been used in accordance with established budget and other requirements. By the 15th day of the month, you have to submit a report that covers the 30 days of the preceding month. So when the month ends on the 30th, you got 15 days to submit that month's activity in a financial report. You submit that to CDA's fiscal section. And if we don't have these, if you're not up to date on these monthly reports, then we cannot disperse any funds. So just be sure, either at the same time or right before you request reimbursement for some funds that you have submitted the most recent monthly report. Okay, the next page, there's primarily two ways of getting reimbursed for your funds. One is the most common one for public service is the per unit method, and a lot of other. The second most common would be the reimbursement method. Reimbursement method entails the transfer of block grant funds to the subrecipient based on actual expenditures. So what you would do, you actually submit to us actual invoices for the cost you've incurred, and you would be reimbursed based on that invoice. And you must include accurate information with all drawdown requests. The reimbursement method requires the actual invoices, but the per unit method, if you've got a negotiated rate in your contract for a per unit, then you also have to submit the main page of your programmatic report, which lists how many units you did that particular month for whatever activities you're contracted for. And we simply verify that information on your programmatic report and multiply it by the per unit rate that's established in your contract. And that's how you are reimbursed. You're reimbursed as you do the work. As if you had so many units of activity in April, we would reimburse you normally the next month, but keep in mind, you can submit reimbursement requests as often as you like. Ideally, it's once or twice a month, but you still must submit a monthly financial report, and it would list at the top all the reimbursements that you've received year to date. There's one column for every month, and then you just get down each column. Every month, you just add to the next column. And you also list your expenditures that you incurred. And this is important. And if you're on a direct reimbursement, well, that's pretty easy. Whatever your expenditures are this month, that's what you're going to submit invoices for to be reimbursed. But if on a per unit basis, you have a budget of what your costs are. So you have to list each month the cost you incurred. Most common, it could be payroll expenses to carry out the activity, or supplies, or if you contract with someone to do some of the work, then you have a contract professional service expense. And you list those each month. And annually, once a year, CDA's fiscal section will come out and do a monitoring visit. And at that time, we document and confirm that the expenditures that you listed, the costs you listed on your monthly financial statement, you actually incurred and expended. And that you are reimbursed for those on a per unit basis. So, at the end of the grant period, what we're looking at when we monitor is if we reimbursed you, say, $50,000 over the year on a per unit basis, did you actually incur $50,000 in cost? And that's a requirement, because if you did not, then you would have to return some of the funding to us. So when you submit your monthly financial, if your contract is per unit, just make sure that you're prepared to provide documentation to support those expenditures that you listed under each month. Because we would normally pick a sample of several months and take a look at the cost and ask you to document those or provide the documentation for those. And so that's your real primary difference between reimbursement and a per unit cost. When you do direct reimbursement, you're already providing the invoices up front when you're being reimbursed. But on a per unit basis, we're coming in after the fact and taking a look at your invoices and documentation and comparing that to what you listed on your monthly financial reporting. Okay. Let's go on to allowable and unallowable cost. And kind of a repeat of some of the things I've said earlier. Allowable cost for CDBG must be reasonable and necessary and allocable according to the CDBG contract. They're authorized or not prohibited under state and local laws and regulations. You conform to the limitations or exclusions of basic laws. You're consistent with policies, regulations, and procedures, either what your agency has established or what CDA requires. And you must follow generally accepted government accounting standards. You got to adequately document it. Anytime you declare an expense on your monthly financial statement, you need to be prepared to support that with documentation. And you treat everything consistently. For instance, this is really a gap requirement too. If you have two programs, you have to do the financial reporting the same for everybody. For each program, if you declare a cost under one accounting concept for one program, you got to follow that same concept for all of your programs. And a simple example would be depreciation expense. If you're going to allocate certain depreciable expense to different programs, you have to use the same method on all of your programs. That's what we mean by consistency. And you have to recognize revenues the same way for each month and each activity. And then also, all your expenses are net of any applicable credits. So if you return something or get a discount, you have to show the net cost. And again, the summary on the next page, it just says it's the prudent person rule. Is the cost reasonable and necessary to carry out the activity that you've been contracted to do? Okay, let's look at some sub-factors in determining reasonableness. The cost would generally be recognized as ordinary and necessary. And the main concept behind this is it's sound business practice, and it's an arm's length bargaining, and it's within the law, and you're complying with the terms of your contract, and mainly the federal regulations such as the uniform guidance. And you also incurred the cost using your organization's established practices. And that means, like, if you we want to prevent one person from overseeing the whole process, such as one person can't go down and buy the item, decide which item is the best item, and also pay the bill. You have to have somebody that is paying the bill should not be the same person that went down and made the purchase. You have to have multiple people and internal controls in place to ensure that no one person controls the whole purchasing process. Okay. The next page, please. Allowable and unallowable cost, most common examples of allowable cost. and some of these are very logical. The cost to establish and maintain accounting and other information. And that would include like if you have an annual audit, if just keep in mind if you expend $750,000 per year, you're required to have a single audit. And that would be an eligible expense by for CDBG. But at the same time, if you have 3 or 4 other funding programs that are also from the federal government, you would have to prorate some of the cost of that audit to each particular contract or award that you have. Like if you got 3 awards, you can't charge the entire audit to one of the awards. You would have to allocate it to the various various awards. Other costs that are eligible and allowable: bonding costs, communications, meaning the telephone and mail, compensation of employees, legal expenses, which only related to administering the federal program. Your dispersing service, and that would include if you have a payroll service to handle your payroll rather than do it internally, the cost for the payroll service related to your staff that is paid out of CDBG, that is eligible. But by that, I mean, let's say you have a staff of 10 people, but only 3 persons are working on the CDBG program. To cover your payroll service cost, you can only get reimbursement for the 3 individuals that the CDBG program is covering their payroll cost, not all 10 of your employees. You would allocate that to the 3 persons with it we're funding rather than the entire office. Employee morale and health and welfare costs, taxes, and those are basically fringe benefits for the employees. Equipment and capital expenditures. Be careful with this because in general, equipment is not allowable. Okay.
Faster is the time.
Okay.
You're doing a great job.
Okay. All right, so just keep in mind equipment and some of those, if it's something that's going to last more than 1 year, but some equipment at a low cost, like a little printer, yes, that could be considered a supply rather than equipment, so that would be eligible. And these other costs, I'll let you read the rest. That's just printing cost and rental cost. Things that are not allowable, it's common sense. And some of these are specified in the regs. Alcoholic beverages, bad debt, contingency funds are not allowable. You can budget that, but you must convert that to a real expense. It can't be paid out as a contingency. Donations, basically fundraising is not allowed under, the cost of incurring fundraising expenses is not a block grant eligible activity. Lawsuits against the federal government, no. Entertainment, I'll let you read those. Those are common sense. Here's some questions you just should ask if you're wondering about allowable costs. Do you have a clearly defined set of standards to determine reasonableness and allowability? Because that's what it all comes down to, reasonable and necessary to carry out the activity. And let's go on. It's a source documentation. And this get to your accounting system, some of the main functions of your accounting system. You can design your accounting system however is practical for you, but you got to be able to pull the data out in order to document and submit your reporting to the federal government or to CDA, whoever. And the most common thing, you have to have a chart of accounts for an accounting system. And the cash receipts journal, just to record all the reimbursements that you receive from us. The disbursement journal is how you just I just leave it to your accounting people, I guess I should say, but your expenses got to be recorded. You can, since payroll is its biggest expense, a big expense, it normally has its own recording mechanism, and all of this falls into and is summed up in the general ledger system. You might enter some of these in a subledger, but they all ultimately get posted to the general ledger, which is where your reporting comes from. Costs against block grants must be properly approved, supported by source documentation, incurred during the contract period. This is important. You can't buy it before in December. If your contract starts in January, don't start buying things in December. Wait till January. And we're going to look to see that you actually paid out the cost. If you incurred them, fine. But we want proof also in the end that you did pay them. Source documentation, invoices, and that state what the costs are and the dates that the expenditures were incurred. Some of the most common type of expenses, let's move on. Personnel costs. If you're claiming personnel costs, you're going to have to keep a payroll register. That's basically proof that you paid somebody, but it also itemizes the taxes, all the deductions. And then also you normally list the employer match for things such as Social Security. And then we're going to ask for proof that you paid those taxes, if we've reimbursed them. And your fringe benefits as well. Usually you have separate invoices for those as opposed to your payroll. But you have to have adequate documentation for all of that if you're claiming it as CDBG cost. Local travel, that can be mileage. If you want reimbursed for mileage, you got to keep an odometer, a mileage report to list your odometer readings. Contract and professional services. Again, if you exceed $10,000 a year for any one vendor or contractor, you must have procurement, which means you submit that to CDA and you get an approval letter stating that you've been approved to spend an amount exceeding $10,000 for that year for that person or vendor. Supplies. We all need supporting supplies such as office supplies, or depending on your activity, you're going to have different types of supplies. And again, if you do more than $10,000 per year, you need procurement. And even so, if you don't, you should show that you competitively bid so that you are being reasonable and in purchasing the cost at a reasonable cost. And equipment, more of the same. It's if you need procurement over $10,000, otherwise you only be limited to less than to $9,999 is all you could declare for any one vendor if you don't do procurement above that. The other cost, the common sense, I don't want to go through each one, but these are just the different types of costs that are eligible. And if you're not sure of them when you read the regulations, just call your program monitor. If they can't answer it, they'll transfer you to the fiscal section and we'll assist you. So in the end, the accounting records and source documentation, they have to record and track the amount of funds you received, your authorized amount, which is your award amount, the obligations of funds, like if you sign a contract with somebody, you have to have a mechanism to show that you've set that aside, because you don't want to overspend. So if you've got 5,000 eligible expenses in one category, you've contracted with $3,000, you only got 2,000 left on basic items that are not contracted with. So you want to, have a mechanism to track these. And then, anything obligated and incurred, the remaining balance is unobligated. And then you assets and liabilities and program income. If you collect program income, like by charging a fee for service, and you use CDBG funds to help you set up the program that's charging the fees, that is program income and must be reported to CDA. And in the end, all actual expenses are on your monthly financial report. Let's go straight to the reimbursement types. You got administrative and planning, construction, citywide home repair, economic development, and public service. Depending on the type of program you've been contracted with to do for CDA, your reimbursement method might be different for each, depending on the type of activity. So just be sure that you understand this process, and if you're not, you can always request technical assistance from CDA, and just pick up the phone and ask. Reimbursement by direct billing, yeah, that's actual invoices. That's a direct reimbursement. And again, this gets down to the different type of activity you're contracted with. So I don't want to go through each of those. If depending on the type of activity you do, just be sure you understand how you get reimbursed from CDA. And if you're not clear, just ask for technical assistance and we'll go over that, because there's too many different types of programs to go into that at this training session is really not practical. I think we give on this PowerPoint a summary of the basic idea. And if you need more information, then if you receive an award, then you should go through this at CDA with technical assistance. These are all just different types of activities. Business loans, commercial district improvement, and technical assistance, public services. The primary reimbursement method for public service is mostly per unit. You have to really perform the activity before you get reimbursed. And and examples there's a half a dozen of them. And again, this is these are all just various ways to on your monthly financial statements. You got a budget when you apply on your monthly statements. You're going to start with that budget, and that's how you're going to list your cost. And then there's a column for each type of budget, and then your rows are for each month, and you put your eligible cost in there, and that's how we've designed the monthly report. And that when we talk about grant reimbursement, and that's how we track how we reimburse you. And then the eligible cost, if your budget's approved, then that type of cost, as we review the application, is going to be eligible. So that's just how we track it during the course of the year until we can come out and do our monitoring visit and verify everything again. So those are the key things you need to be aware of. I think some of these concepts for the rest of the presentation are just very basic. You have to submit accurate reports, timely, meaning monthly, and they have to be current, because if they're not current, you won't be reimbursed. We'll hold up the payments until you're current. And you have to completely disclose it. Whatever cost you incurred, put it on there. Whether or not you've been reimbursed yet, then it's you have to fully disclose any money that you're gonna cost that you're gonna apply to your block grant. And again, like I say, the monthly financial report is designed to capture all this and to help ensure compliance. So your budget's on there, your reimbursements are on there, the actual costs that you incurred, and then at the end, when you carry out the formula, anything remaining is going to be your available balance, which is by the end of the 12th month of your contract, it should be zero. Again, submit the reports by the 15th of the month. We mentioned here submitted through eGrams, but we're in the process of replacing eGrams. So actually, we'll probably have another program this year in mid-year. And if you can't function that, if you can't, you could always submit it by email, but just call for fiscal side, but contact your fiscal monitor and let them know that that's what you want to do, either because eGrams is, if we're transitioning to the new program, just to make it smooth, we'll let you submit stuff by email. One of the last things I'm going to talk about is modified total direct cost. If you're going to do indirect costs, you must prepare what's called a modified total direct cost schedule. And that's the method of your indirect costs are based on a percent of your direct cost. And there's certain costs that are not eligible, and it depends on your program. And so if you're going to use indirect costs, you need to fill out a modified total direct cost and submit it to CDA, and we're to approve it and get back with you. And if you're going to do that, just contact us and we'll walk you through it if you're not familiar with this process. It's a little too complicated if you're new to it to just go over it in this presentation, but this breaks it out for you, and it's not that difficult once you are able to walk through the process, and especially if we can explain it to you. But just the key thing is, if you're going to do indirect cost, you've got to prepare a modified total direct cost schedule. And so really that wraps up our presentation. And there's rules and regulations that we got to follow with the federal government, and unfortunately it can seem cumbersome at times, but I think once you work with us and you get the gist of it, it's not that bad. So thank you, and I think I'll turn this back over to Tommy.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, Shonda. Okay, you're welcome.
We are going to open up for any questions, and here's Tom. I'm going to hop on now.
Okay, it looks like we do have some questions in the chat, and we really would like to thank everyone for their patience for hanging on through us into your lunch hour. So let's just start with the chat here. Latasha asked, will we be talking about the grants for economic development projects? These are the ones on page 11 on the RFP. Maybe someone from the CDA team would like to briefly speak on the economic development category of CDBG. Or Latasha, if you're still around, we could take you and are you here? Latasha, if you raise your hand, we can make you live and you can ask a specific question. So I see your hand raised, Latasha. We're going to bring you on. Latasha, you should be live if you have any specific questions about that page 11 economic development category of CDBG. Go ahead and unmute, Latasha, and you can ask your specific question. If you unmute. Okay. Some audio issues. Maybe I think Nate's interested in this as well, so maybe we'll go ahead and have Nate ask that question about economic development activities. You should be live, Nate.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I just sort of noticed that the majority of the presentation is really geared towards the public services portion of the RFP. And I got a couple questions answered by Lisa Jones about the fact that it doesn't look like there's a specific output model for economic development. But it is hard based on the information we have right now to understand how applying for an eligible economic activity that's either listed in the RFP or under HUD CDBG guidelines, how we are going to measure that that is affecting low and moderate income level individuals or Section 3 businesses, for instance. Are we allowed to just say we're working within HUD qualified census tracts, and so eligible activities would meet the measurement requirements, or what are some good strategies and best practices for that?
I'd like to ask our CDA team if anyone wants to help answer that question. How do we measure outputs on economic development activities? Lisa or
Yes.
Rashonda?
So it all depends on what your activity is, and who you're serving. So if you're serving individuals, then you have to make sure that those individual clients or participants are low to moderate income individuals. And looking at the economic development part of the RFP, there is the micro enterprise, which that would be individuals. And then there's the business development where you provide financial incentives to create jobs. And then you have the commercial facade improvements. So that would be the facade improvements would be businesses.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that the micro enterprise as defined by CDBG is 5 or less employees. And so it just seems like some clarification on the measurement eligibility and outcomes would be helpful for economic development activities.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so I think that micro enterprise is actually defined as 5 or less employees. And so like if we were helping a business that had 3 employees, right? The outputs of household or person are not going to work for a business with 3 employees.
Okay, so your program would have to provide tech. So micro enterprise and a program means that you provide technical assistance, business support services, and other similar services to owners of micro enterprises or persons developing incubators for use by micro enterprises. So whomever you help has to, whatever your activity is, it should support this criteria.
Right, but I guess to drill it down, my question would be, am I going to have to income certify every business owner that shows up to a training session?
That is correct.
Okay. That's all right.
Great. Nate, do you have any other questions or and as you know, we're available later for technical assistance, and we'll be publishing the everyone's written questions and answers as we approach September 6th.
Yeah, I guess I would just be very interested to know if CDA has the ability under the statutes to figure out how to do geographic based measurement improvements, because obviously that would be much easier for the economic development activities.
It's not CDA based, it's really HUD based, and it must meet a national objective in LMI area or where at least 51% or more in the area are an LMI population. It's a federal HUD regulation, not CDA related. And so because we receive this HUD funding, we are obligated to comply accordingly. There, for this particular funding source. There are other funding sources that don't have the restrictions related to LMI populations and clientele servicing.
Right, and sorry, I'm beating a dead horse here, but what I'm trying to figure out is it an absolute requirement to certify every individual's income? Or is it possible to certify, for instance, HUD qualified census tracts are going to meet that LMI, and so any businesses within that area then would be eligible to receive CDBG funded services? That's what I'm trying to get at.
You have to certify each individual.
Okay.
I hope this helps you.
Okay, thank you, Nate. Let's get back into the chat. People have been super patient. Just covering some bases. Will there be a recording of this workshop? Yes, it's streaming on YouTube now. So you go to the city's YouTube and you can find it. We'll also post it on that 2025 CDBG webpage, where you'll also see the links to the RFP, other documents. Scrolling down, S. Pruitt had asked a while ago, can organizations apply for both funding opportunities? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. I'm not sure where in the presentation exactly, but within different categories, yes, you can apply for different categories. Nick asked about how to get a hold of CDA members for help. If you have those written questions, cdbg at stlewis-mo.gov. So that's where you want to send those written technical questions to keep this process competitive. We compile those and then answer all the questions written, so everyone is privy to the same information. But just go ahead and go to CDA's website. That's the city website /CDA, and find our about and contacts. You'll be able to find our phone numbers and emails there. And on all of the city's news pages, you can find the PIO, Public Information Officer's phone number and email, and that's me. And I'm happy to direct you to the CDA staff that can best help you. Still scrolling down. Nick also asked about that glossary that's not published yet. That's a fun project I've been working on. I'm going to go ahead and publish that this week, but go ahead and reach out to me and I'll send you the rough draft. It's a pretty cool document about 6 pages of all the government acronyms you could ever be curious about. And then I'll mention, if you go to CDA's Twitter, you can see our daily definition where we're sharing those a day at a time. So go ahead and reach out to me if you'd like to see that internal document that we're going to make public this week, nagelT@stlewis-mo.gov, and I'll send that over to you. That performa is on the same document page as the RFP. So city's website CDA/CDBG/2025, the program year for this RFP. And then Dr. Carl asked, will this presentation be available? Yes, as soon as we're done here, I will upload this slide deck to that web page that holds all these other CDA, CDBG 2025 documents. I know that we're getting super late. Does anyone want to go live? And we can try and answer any questions live. Just go ahead and raise your hand, or we can you can put your question in the chat. If you just raise your hand, we'll unmute you and you can come in live with any questions that you have. I think because we're so late that there are some questions in the Q&A, but just to save time, I think everyone wants to go into their noon hour break. And we really appreciate people staying on. That we'll just publish those within that Q&A, the ones here in the Zoom Q&A. We have several members of CDA as panelists, but also as attendees. This is anything, I know we've gone through everything, but is there anything we've missed the CDA team would like to share? Panelists, go ahead and let us know, or CDA staff who are attendees, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll unmute you if there's anything you'd like to share. Yeah. Okay. Latasha, I know you had your hand raised, but we didn't, your microphone might not be working. We could, if you have a question in the chat that's specific, we could answer that. Or just go ahead and head over to our website, find that CDA About and Contacts page, and just go ahead and give one of us a call. You'll find the phone numbers for Rashonda, Lisa, and me there, and we'd like to answer your questions. Okay, we are almost 3/4 of an hour over. And so we're just so appreciative of everyone's time and really everyone's interest, and all of you and your organizations, all the great work that you do for our city and for our region, and being a part of this program. It takes a lot of work to make that amazing work happen in our community, and we're just so thankful for you and what your colleagues and your board members and your clients, everything that you're doing here. So thank you so much. Lisa, Rashonda, any last words until we go ahead and say goodbye to everyone?
No, just apply, apply, apply.
Thank you.
And thank you to STL TV. Thank you, Tony, for your patience and your technical assistance as always, guiding us through this very informative meeting. So thank you so much, Tony and STL TV, for everything you do. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and let you get on with your day. And remember, it's almost Friday. And thank you for spending your morning and the first part of your afternoon with us. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. We can go ahead and close down here. And I'm going to make sure I bug you for that report so I don't bug you 2 weeks later, and we'll yeah, close it down. I'm just going to wait until everyone is out so we have a smooth transition out as we say goodbye, and this recording will be on YouTube.